Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's session on the brand Storyteller Basecamp. My name is DJ Netz, and I'm the current past president of the ATD Cascadia chapter. And I'm really thrilled and excited to have Andrew Robinson here to present his Basecamp and to give us his insights on working on our brands and becoming better storytellers. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. Thank you.
Great, thanks, DJ. And thanks to ATD for having me here today. I've been looking forward to this, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day to be here. My goal is to make this well worth your time and that it would transform the way that you do things. My name is Andrew Robinson, and I'm a brand anthropologist, which is kind of a weird title. Basically, it means that I help companies know and tell their authentic story. 15 years, I've worked with a wide variety of different companies, internally and externally. I've worked with global brands and small, fiery startups and everyone in between. I absolutely love what I do. It's a privilege to be here with all of you today. I look forward to interacting with you. Some of you I may have met at the last ATD conference. If not, I look forward to hopefully meeting you again in the future. I live in Eugene, so not too far away from here. I've been married for 21 years, the same lovely wife. We have 3 daughters who keep me on my toes nonstop, along with 4 chickens, used to be 5, and a Bernese mountain dog named Leela, whom I love. And let's see, when I'm not busy doing all of my work, I try to get away, do some songwriting and fly fishing and catch my breath. We all know how important those kinds of things are. So right now, I think it's kind of interesting to find out what people are reading. I'm reading a book right now. It says something about someone, what they're reading. I'm reading a book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. For those of you, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, it's a great book, excellent research. I'd highly recommend it. Again, it's called Quiet. Some of you have probably read it. It's phenomenal. It's really helped me understand myself and the people I work with. It helps me understand how you can enjoy doing things like this and then want to go crawl up into a ramen restaurant and recollect yourself. So highly recommend it. Expectations for today, a few things that I would highly recommend. One is make sure you have the workbook, and you can fill it out online. You can also print it or fill it out as a PDF. But make sure you have the Brand Storyteller workbook. I've actually created a whole version just for this presentation, just for people like you. And so make sure you have that close at hand. One thing that you should not have close at hand is this, your cell phone. Some of you may have seen research on how learning is directly related or inversely related to how close you are to your cell phone. So they took 3 groups. And they tested how well they learned based on the distance that their cell phone was from them. And lo and behold, what did they find? The people who had the cell phone that was in the next room actually learned more than other people. So this is a great thing to take back into your own work. The fact is whether we're conscious of it or not, digital technology inhibits our learning. And so I would highly recommend, like me, that you throw your cell phone. I can give mine to DJ and he can take care of it. So now that we're all set, let's dig in, close out any apps, and really focus on what we're going to talk about today. And I want to begin with a question that everyone can answer. How many of you, and everyone should be able to find the chat box here, how many of you have had the experience where in your work you do a training or you build something out and you get feedback from the people that you're serving that this truly impacted their lives? How many of you have had that experience? If you have, just say yes in the chat box. I remember not too long ago finishing a training session. I had done about an 8-month training session that I had built out for a large company. And someone came up after me and she said, our team has been stuck for months, and this is exactly what we needed. Thank you so much. And doesn't that make it worth it when people come back and they tell you what you did, all the work you put in was worth it? So hopefully you've had that experience. And by the same token, many of you have probably had the experience where no matter what you do, what you try, you just can't get people to buy in. And that is extremely frustrating. And I can think vividly of a moment during that training program that I'd put together, where I could tell this one guy just was not engaged, and so we had a break, and I even engaged him on the side and tried to get him into it, and there was just no moving him, and I realized he was really just there as a compliance issue to be part of it. And many of you can relate to that experience. No matter how hard you try, you just can't engage everybody, and that's okay. What we want to do is make sure that we're engaging as many people as possible, because there are people out there that can benefit from the things that we have to offer. So what I think you're going to get out of this is you're going to get tools that you can put into practice immediately that will help you share your message, your gifts, your experiences in a way that people can gain more value out of what you do. The second incredible benefit of this is that it makes your job more meaningful, because those experiences, when people come back and tell us that what we did helped them, make our lives and our work more meaningful. And that's the goal of what we're talking about. So again, if you haven't already, make sure that you have that workbook. Typically, people who are part of this share certain qualities. And those qualities tend to be that we are all frustrated. We've had experiences like the one I just described, where people are, we know we can do better. We know that we can improve on our work. So we're frustrated, and that fuels this determination. We know that we want to get better. So if you're with me, if you're on this page, you are someone who is incredibly determined to improve what you're doing. That's probably why you're joining me today. But you don't just want to do it, you want to do it well, and that's where excellence comes in. I know that I have an incredibly high standard for my work, what I bring to my clients, what I bring to you, and I trust that you're the same. You don't want to just do things, you want to do them well. So if that's you, if these three things describe you, then you are most certainly in the right place. I've also designed a resource for you that's going to help you take this to another level, and I'll share that at the end. It's called the Hero's Journal, and that's going to help you take this, what we talk about, and actually go deeper with it, because we're going to talk about a number of different stories that you interact with in your work every day. One of the most important stories is your story, and that's what the Hero's Journal is all about. So I will make that link available at the end. It's a free download and serves as a bonus resource for what we're doing here. What often happens in addition to that is people will say, hey, this was awesome. I love Basecamp. I'm really interested in going deeper with that. And for that reason, I've created what I call the Summit. So if this is a Basecamp, we're going to go up to the Summit. And it's a 4-week, completely online course that I take people through. You get a lot of one-on-one coaching, and we translate everything we learn into your own personal practice. And I'll make a registration link available at the end as well for those of you that want to go deeper with everything we're going to talk about today. So there are a few tools that we're going to go through and that you're going to take away from this. The first is you're going to learn to craft these messages that resonate with your audiences. You're going to learn how to take what you do and translate it into messages that resonate. We don't just do this work so that we can just do it for ourselves. We're doing it for other people. So we're going to talk about how to do that. The other is we're going to enable your audiences to see themselves in your message. And I'm going to say this over and over and over again. You and I are attracted to people. We're attracted to resources. We're attracted to the whatever coffee shop you went in this morning, because we see ourselves in those stories. So when you get up in front of people, or when you produce content for people, resonance happens when they can see themselves in the story that you create. And we're going to talk more about that. And then we're going to talk about how to overcome the single greatest barrier to the work that you and I do, which is what I call data telling. It's the opposite of storytelling. We do it, we don't even know we're doing it, and I'm going to talk about that and how to overcome that. This whole journey for me began about in the early 2000s, late 90s. I was traveling a lot around the country, doing a lot of trainings and speaking engagements. And I had that deep sense that you probably all have as well, that, you know what, when I get done with a training, and despite all the positive feedback, I know within myself that I can do a better job. And that drove me nuts. So I immersed myself in as much research as I could find about behavioral science, communication theory. So I had all of that going on one side. And then what I did was I actually immersed myself in design, architecture, all sorts of different things, which sounds really weird, right? But when I put those two together, it helped me develop an approach to training, to speaking, to messaging, to creating content that was incredibly compelling. Now, the first time I went out and tried this was in Washington, D.C., and I went into this hotel, came into this huge room that I was speaking in, and honestly, it felt like I was writing with my non-dominant hand, if you've ever had that experience. It didn't feel natural, but I trusted that this is a process that I've created. This is going to be more impactful to the people that I'm working with. But it didn't feel right. It felt uncomfortable. You know how it is. Every time you do something different, it feels uncomfortable. So I get done with my talk, and I'm thinking, I don't know if that went well at all, because it just didn't feel as natural, as the traditional method of presenting. And I was completely overwhelmed. I stepped back, as you often do after a training or something, and I looked up, and it was like this ocean of people were coming forward to get more information, to learn more, to ask questions. And I sat there for about an hour interacting with this group, and it was the most overwhelming feedback I've ever had. And that set in motion this whole process for me, building this process that I'm going to go through with you, and it all hinges on one thing. People don't just have stories. People actually are stories. And what I mean by that is that people, you and I, and everyone we serve, have villains, they have struggles, they have an idea of what it looks like to be a hero. There's a resolution. There's a life that they consider well lived, and there are things that get in the way of them living that life. And the more that you and I can speak to those things, the more resonance that we will build with them. So let me go through this 5-phase process with you. I'm going to give you an overview first, and then we're going to break each of these out one by one. The first story we're going to focus on is your audience's story. We're going to focus on who your audience is, who are their villains, what are their struggles, what do they consider a hero, and that's going to shape how you speak with them, how you empathize with them, what kind of content you create for them. It changes everything. The second thing we're going to go through is your audience's brand story. Your audience lives in a context, as you know. So you're serving people that live in a greater culture, a greater work culture, and it's important to understand who their brand is. What's their brand story? Because brands don't just have stories, brands actually are stories as well. Good brands know exactly who their villain is. Starbucks knows exactly who their villain is. Their villain is anyone that gets in the way of them creating connection in their third place. Many of you have probably read about the whole concept of a third place. That's Starbucks' villain, and I go into more of that during Summit, and we unpack some actual case studies on that. The third story that I always want to be aware of is my message. What sort of story can I create within my content? I don't want to just provide information. I want to craft content that actually flows in a rise and fall of a good story. So I use a framework to help structure the content that I use. And the last story is your medium. How can I take that content? What sort of media can I employ to make that content as meaningful as possible in the context where the people that I'm trying to reach live? So those are the 4 stories. The 5th one I will cover at the end. It brings all of this together. And what I'm going to do throughout this is actually take you through a case study that I did not too long ago. Just because I signed an NDA, I can't say who it is, but most of you know who it is. It's a large global apparel brand, and they brought me in to help train 500 of their top brand leaders on how to do storytelling. So it's right in my sweet spot. We had about 8 months to build it out, but here's the challenge. I want to know what you would do in this situation. You have 500 people who are located in 6 different locations throughout the globe. How do you take that kind of training? Many of you deal with these challenges all the time. So that was the challenge presented to me. That was the brief. We want our brand leaders to be better storytellers. Problem is they're located in different areas. So how do we go about doing that? So I'll walk you through how I broke that down bit by bit. But ultimately the goal is how do we bring all of these stories into place? Rather than dealing with them all over like popcorn, how do we bring them into a coherent line? Because what happens when we do that is that people can see themselves in our story. Everyone that we work with, everyone that you get up in front of and work with or interact with today, everyone you've worked with before we got together today, is trying to do this. They're trying to see themselves in what you're doing. They're trying to see themselves in the content that you're creating. They're trying to see themselves in the brand that you represent. When we put all these stories together, that's exactly what happens. So let's jump in on this first piece, the audience story. Let's focus on the people that you are actually trying to reach right now. Right now. You and I, throughout the rest of today, throughout tomorrow, next week, we are interacting with different audiences. So my first question for you is I want you to think about not just a crowd, not just an audience, but an actual person that you want to reach more than anyone else. So if you can think of that single person that you want to reach, that if you are trying to engage someone in a training program, you're trying to engage them in some sort of experience, some sort of resource, who's that person that you truly want to reach? You don't have to name that name, but in the chat window there, just let us know that you got it. You got that person. I can think of exactly who I want to reach. I'm building out a training program right now, and I'm thinking it's like a muse that we create. And who is that person that we want to reach? And in your workbook, you'll see space there that you can actually fill in the different audiences that you want to reach. So how do we go about building out the audience's story? I think about an audience's story in 4 different levels. The first is, who is our audience? And again, put that down in your workbook. List the different people that you're trying to reach. Now, those may be people that you're working with directly. They may be vendors. They may be people that you interact with in order to interact with other audiences. But I want you to list every single audience that you are trying to reach right now. Now, just because of our time together today, you're not going to have time probably to fill all of that out. But take some time after this and tease that out. While I'm thinking about it, I would also highly recommend you take the workbook back to your team and have them fill this out. It creates a common language and common goals around all of this. What are their most important struggles? You know, if you think about the shows that you, let's admit it, you get like, you binge watch, you get stuck like, okay, just one more episode. Or you think about a book that you read and you go, okay, just one more chapter. Like I'm reading The Hobbit to my 2 younger girls right now, and we're getting toward the end, and every time at night I go, okay, it's time, you know, we got to be done. It's always like, oh, we can't, no, one more. So what is it that makes stories so interesting? It's the struggle. But we work so hard to make the struggle go away. The struggle is the good stuff. It's what makes stories interesting, and it's what makes your audience's story interesting as well. Just because it makes it difficult doesn't make it important. It is incredibly important. What's incredibly important as well is that you understand what those struggles are. So you've made your list of who you're trying to reach. Now I want to ask you, go in, figure out what their struggles are. What are they contending with day in, day out? What is keeping them from getting to where they want to go? Now let's talk about their resolution. Every story has a beginning, it has a crisis, and it has a resolution. I like to think of the resolution as what they consider a day well lived. So think about your audience. When they look to the future, what do they consider a day well lived, where they can actually go, oh, yes, I gained a victory over my struggle. I got to the end. It feels good. They can let down. That's what I'm talking about. The way that we define that says a lot about who we are. It'll give you priceless information. All of this will give you invaluable information on your audience and how to reach them. So let's talk about the case study. Remember, large global brand. They've got people scattered all over the globe, and they want a training for 500 of their top brand representatives. What would you do? Well, because this is my first step, I wanted to get to know my audience. I wanted to understand them. I didn't want to just know about them. I didn't want to know their title or what appears on their business card. I wanted to know what sort of rhythms define their life. I want to know what the answers are to those questions that I just posed to you. So I requested a day where I sat in a meeting room and we scheduled out 45 minute to an hour-long sessions. We had food and refreshments, and groups came and went, and I interacted with those people that I would be serving. This is the very front end of the project before I had even put anything down in terms of content. What I love about that is it allowed me to watch them interact with each other. That's what it's more about. We learn so much more from watching how other people interact and how they respond to our questions. So my job was to get questions and then sit back and watch them interact with each other, and I got priceless insight into how they live their lives. I got to know their struggles. I got to know what they consider a day well lived. And that then I could take back and help shape the content that I created. Because here's the deal. You and I are experts in different ways, right? So you have things that you are far better at than I am. We all have our areas of expertise. When we get brought in on projects like this, the temptation is to say, great, I know all this. I know exactly what I'm going to do, and I know exactly what I'm going to provide. But that's only about 10% of what we have to offer. We have to take that 10%. We have to take our expertise and tailor it and personalize it to the people that we're serving. This kind of work was priceless for helping me think about how can I take my area of expertise and actually tailor it to this audience that I'm going to be serving. So that, I would highly encourage whatever seems appropriate for you to get to know your audience, whether it's surveys, interviews, doing what I did where you get to sit down with a group and have informal conversations. You'll gain insight that's invaluable to what you're doing. Okay, let's move to the second step of this, of this sequence. I want to understand the audience's brand story. Now, what I mean by brand story is that the people that you're serving, as I said, live in a culture. They're part of this context, as you know, that's different. If you're serving one company, their culture is going to be uniquely different from another company. And being aware of those nuances is critical to the success of how we help them. So pick a brand that you're working with. Maybe you're working internally, so that's really easy, or maybe you're serving as an external vendor or something, and you work with a variety of different brands, but I want you to pick one. And I want you to answer this question and put it in the chat box. What single word captures this brand? What single word captures this brand? How would you go about summarizing what they're about? Maybe it's innovation, or maybe it's competition, or maybe it's agility. I don't know. Think about different adjectives, nouns, whatever, verbs that come to mind to describe this brand that sets them apart from their competition. Okay. Now, how do we go about learning about their brand story? And here's where we need to become anthropologists. This is where we start asking questions and we're insatiably curious, and we go in and we start thinking about what is their brand story. These are the questions, or a sample of some of the questions that I like to ask. Why did this company even come into being? It's an important question. If this company came into being and is still in existence, there's a reason for it. And don't be satisfied with trite answers. You know, they came into being to create some sort of solution. That's not helpful. What we want to do is think about really why did they come into being? What sort of problem were they trying to solve? What sort of struggle did they identify that inspired their birth? The second question is, what is their means to their end? So let me unpack this. This question makes all the difference in the world. So let's go back to Starbucks. Starbucks is not a coffee company. Their coffee, making coffee, is a means to a greater end. And that greater end is creating a third place where people connect with one another. So Starbucks is fundamentally a connection company. Coffee is just the way they happen to do it. So what is the means and what is the end of the brand that you're serving? This is incredibly important because it gets at the defining elements of their own brand story. And what do they consider a year well lived? So let's forecast. Let's look ahead. What's it going to look like for this to be a great year? Is it stock price? Is it retention rates? Is it engagement rates? What is it? Think about it. Is it product launch, projects? Think about it in terms of what do they consider a year well lived? So that gives you a nice overview of some of the questions that I like to ask in terms of better understanding their brand culture. And these are things that will likely come out of, these are the things that came out of the groups that I formulated on this previous project, on this case study. And they're things that you may know to some degree now, but as always, just begin with an attitude that you may or may not know the right answer. So go in curious and stay curious. So what this looked like in the case study for me was I did as much research as I possibly could in addition to meeting with people in person and doing the group, the unfocused groups I call them. But I did online research. I actually read an entire book that their founder wrote that gave me a lot of insight that I was able to then combine with the insight that I got from the audience, and again, totally transformed how the content that I created. For example, see, my goal is I always want whatever I create to be something that they receive and it looks like their own, it feels like their own, everything about it feels like their own brand and it matches them as people. I mean, that's what we all want, right? So part of that was I got certain terms that, oh no, we don't use this term, we use that term. You know, and you've had that happen probably where you have to reshape the linguistics of how you present what you present. But it also shapes visuals, it shapes structure, it shapes everything. And as we'll get to down the road, it can shape your message and your media. So let's jump into the message. Your content is important. Likely, you know, for you and I, when we talk about our areas of expertise, our content is far more important to us than to other people, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But our content is important. It's what can reach out and resonate and connect and help people. So let me begin with a question. And I have to remind myself of this all the time. I had to remind myself of this coming to talk with you today. What is that single idea that you want to translate to people? What's that one thing when they get up and they walk out the door that you want them to take with you? A single idea. It has to be one. So think about it. Think about a project you're working on right now. Think about the audience you're trying to reach. What is that one thing that you want to translate to them? This is incredibly difficult, I find, because when we get into a project, we get into this blizzard of ideas and potential options and all these things we could do and lose sight of the one thing that we want them to take away. So when I'm building out a program, I have that one thing in front of me, and everything I do is in service to that one idea. So I would challenge you, write down a bunch of ideas if you need to. Hey, I'd love if they took this. I'd love if they took this. I use sticky notes a lot. You may as well, and you put those out. But then focus in on that one idea that you really want them to take away. Okay, here are some questions that I ask to help me clarify what I want to share. What are you trying to say? This sounds silly, right? But what are you actually trying to say? It makes sense to us, and in our own head, our challenge is how do we translate it so that it actually connects with other people? So write out what you want to say in a way and then that makes sense to them. So I'll even write out a talk or a presentation or a training, and then I'll read it back to myself or even record it, and I'll catch myself saying the most ridiculous things that I know what I mean, but they don't know what I mean. You know, acronyms are a great example. I have an allergic reaction to acronyms. So, but we use them, and we don't even know that we're using them. So again, go through, make sure that the language, it connects with the people, it reaches out to them and is immediately accessible. What excites you the most about this and why? In our work, I would say the most important thing is faith. You and I can tell when someone truly believes in what they're talking about. They're not just talking about a topic, they're not just going through the motions, they're not just providing you with the data, they actually believe it. This is something that's real to them, it's substantive to them. So what I do is I ask myself, what excites me about this? Why do I do this? You know, what is it that gets me charged? Because that's what's going to reach out and connect with people. One of the processes I like to go through with clients and with myself is what I call WITI, W-I-T-I, which is, why is that important? This is priceless. Some of you may have heard the 5 whys. It's similar to that. But essentially you're coming up with, this is what I want to say, but why is that important? And then I come up with one answer to that question. And then I say, well, why is that important? And so essentially I'm going through the sequence of why questions until you get to this bottom and you're like, yes, that's it. That is exactly what I'm trying to get across in my message. So I'd really encourage you to go through that process in what you're doing. It refines it down to this one single idea that they'll take away.
And Andrew,
yes.
So Tracy from Portland, Oregon.
Hi, Tracy.
She typed in that the one thing that she wants her client to take away is to use design thinking to know your customers' goals so you can match solutions to get the results they want and need.
That's great. So say it one more time. Design thinking.
Use design thinking to know your customers' goals so you can match solutions to get the results they need.
Okay, so it sounds like Tracy's actually using design thinking in her own thought process. Yes, yeah, that's awesome. Iteration and prototyping. Yes, exactly. Okay, that gets me really excited. I could get off track, but I'm going to stay focused because that's exactly what I did. I built a prototype. I prototyped this project to make sure that the message was on point, and it was fabulous. Made a huge difference. So that's great. Any other questions before I move on?
No.
Is that good? Okay.
So
Thanks,
far.
Tracy. Okay. Now let's go to this fourth piece, the medium or the media that we employ. So we have all kinds of options. So many options that it can be overwhelming, right? You can do any number of things to try to take that message and disseminate it to the people that you're trying to reach. And that's an enormous challenge. Here's where I try to push myself to not just do what everyone else is doing. Now, maybe what everyone else is doing, that's for a reason, and we're wise to pay attention to that. But maybe there's a better option. Maybe there's something else that we haven't thought of. And that's where meeting with your audience, getting to know them more, asking those kinds of questions, getting to know their brand more can help precipitate different options that we hadn't even thought about before. So I would challenge you to just think of how are these people, when they leave work, how are they engaging with meaningful content? How are they learning outside of work? There is an incredible amount of richness to be found in going like, well, what do you interact with after work? Where do you go? What do you learn from? What's most engaging to you? What podcasts do you listen to? What sort of YouTube videos do you find most helpful? What sort of speakers or TED Talks are you drawn to and why? And those kinds of things help you then think, okay, how can I have my medium or my media reflect those kinds of media that they're already interacting with. They're already speaking that language. It's already something that they trust, that they find relevant. So those are the kind of questions that I go through with that. So let me ask you to take a media inventory of your own work and write down all of the different media that you use. So think about all the different ways that you try to take that message and get it out to the people that you are trying to reach. Because once we get all of that out, I would ask you, why are you doing these things? Why are you using these, and what are you finding useful? And what else could you explore? Because I mean, we know how it is. We look at what other people are doing, it's like, oh, okay, I guess that's how we're supposed to do it. And again, maybe that is the case. But I found incredible insights in going, well, maybe it's not the case. Maybe there are other really interesting ways to present my message to other people. So here's some questions that I ask. How do you try to move your audience? Listen, I mean, when you and I do this work, we don't do it so that people can remain in the same place, right? I mean, why would I do what I do to try to, build inertia into the cultures that I work with? No, we're trying to do the opposite. We're trying to push people and encourage them and inspire them to do or think or create something different. So that's what I think is important to start with. How am I trying to do that? What sort of media am I using? Then to think critical about the different tools that we employ. Why am I using the things that I'm using, like I said? So being critical, challenging ourselves to think different in this area. And then last, what haven't I tried? Like what would be like a really, really crazy thing to try? Maybe some of you may be familiar with Edward de Bono's work on creativity, but he has some crazy creativity exercises or thought experiments like what if we landed a plane upside down? Kind of like he'll go in and work with culture. So I'll ask myself just like crazy things like what haven't we tried? Oh, we haven't tried skywriting. I mean, I don't know, that's kind of ridiculous, but it gets you thinking about, no, this would actually be really an interesting way to surprise people and delight them with this message. So it's more than just data. It's something that comes alive and that they get excited about. So going back to this project, what I did was up to this process, I had learned you have people scattered all over the globe. My meetings with these people helped me understand that this group that I'm trying to reach does not stand still. I could see it when I was on their campus. I could see it in all the people I worked with. They were just constantly moving. So my challenge is, how do I create content for people that don't sit still? the initial thought was, hey, we'll do an online learning program. We'll take the storytelling content and we'll put it into an e-learning program that everyone can go through, and we can track their progress, and we can see who did it, who didn't do it, all that stuff. Which really, in the end, only serves really the people who are deploying the training. It doesn't actually serve the people on the other end of the training, because it forces them to just go through the motions. I wanted something that they could do and stay in motion. So one day I was sitting and I was working with the training team, and we were thinking through these questions, and suddenly I pictured someone in Brooklyn on a train, and I was trying to think, how do I reach that person? How do I reach that person who's on a train in Brooklyn, and I'm going to provide them with content that's going to reach and resonate with them? And then it hit me, a podcast. So I pitched to them, what if we just did a podcast? We took all of this stuff and we put it into a series of podcasts that we can make available. This isn't just going to be data and information. We're going to actually create stories, and through those stories, they're going to learn the elements of storytelling. And that's what we ended up doing. So in addition to doing a live training in some areas, we furnished everyone else with a podcast training that they could download and listen to wherever they were. And it was fabulous. It was wonderful. So, but again, I wouldn't have gotten there had I not gone through this process. So those are the 4 phases that I go through. I go through all of those phases as I'm thinking about it. But the thing that I cannot forget, and the thing that I even reminded myself of this morning coming in here, is that there's a 5th piece, and that 5th piece is what makes this all work, and that's you. You are the messenger. You have a message, you have content, you have all that, but in the end, it's you. If people connect with you, they connect with your message. So the success of my message with you today it really hinges on how well you feel like you and I connect. So I'm deeply aware of that, and it's helpful for you to be deeply aware of that as well in all of your work. Good content's important, your message is important, all that's important. I don't mean to dismiss that, but it's you. Who you are as a person, your personality, your experience, your gifts, the things that I refer to as like your Rain Man gifts, the things that you do that are quirky and unusually good, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the things that make this all work. So these are the questions that I would present to you and have you think through. And again, you're tracking through this in your workbook. Why do you do this? Why do you do this work? What is it that fuels you? It's so easy to get adrift from this question, and I am as vulnerable to this as anybody, where I'll sit up and I'll go, wait a second, why am I doing this? Where am I going? And I have to backtrack. And I plan every 3 months, I kind of come back and I actually ask myself this question. I do a quarterly review of my own work, and I think through, why do I do this? And it's like I reground myself going into the next quarter. And I would encourage all of you to ask this question, because it brings us back, it sobers us up, and we go, that's right, this is exactly why I do what I do. And why is that important? Again, this witty process. Why is that important? So if these are the reasons I list for why I do what I do, why are those things even important? What impact do they make in other people's lives? Why do they feed me? Go through that set of questions. And then the last questions. This is something you just have to get comfortable with, is being able to acknowledge, I'm actually better than most people in this area, right? Like this area. Like, I'm really, really bad at databases. Like, you would never want me doing your taxes. It would be an awful experience. So there are lots of things I'm really not good at. But as I've done more work, as I've had different experiences like you come to see, like, you know what, I'm kind of freakishly good in this area. So that's worth paying attention to, and it's worth being okay with. It doesn't make us better people necessarily, but it's helpful to play from where this is what I'm really, really good at, and I don't have to be good at those other things. So this helps ground us in who we are as messengers. That's what we do. That's who we are. And this is the most important part of all of these 5 pieces. It puts everything together. And what's beautiful is that when all of these things do come together, people actually see themselves in our story. And that's where it all comes together. They actually see themselves, everything we do, everything we present them with, it resonates with them. That's why we do what we do. So here you are, and your audience stands across from you, and you are trying to get this information across. One of the challenges is to remember how this all works. Now, most of you have taken some sort of communication courses along the way, so I'm going to give you a quiz here. Communication is made of two parts, right? And what are they? The how and the what. So the question is, which is more important, the how or the what? So many of you may think, well, I think probably the how is a little more important, maybe not as important as the what, but I'm not sure exactly what proportions or which. But just to clarify, the how is, the what is the data. Like if one of you just typed in a message on the chat window right now, that's the data, that's the what. It's just, on a screen. It's just words on a screen, assuming you can't use emojis. That's it. That's the what. The how is everything else. So, I could say, hey, DJ, could you please open the door? Or I could say, hey, DJ, could you please open the door? The data has stayed the same, but how I said it changed everything. So a number of years ago, Stanford University wanted to figure out what proportion is which is more important, the how or the what. What do you think they found? 60-40? That seems reasonable. I mean, that seems rational. Or maybe it's the 80-20 rule, 80% how or 20% what. But if you had to guess, what would you guess? What percentage? For those of you that don't know, they actually discovered that it's 93-7. That means 93% is how and 7% is what. But the problem is that when you and I go to present or you and I go to build something out, what do? We focus on the what instead of the how. We actually inverse these two proportions, and we focus 93% on what content are we going to do, and what do they need to know, and what data do we need to share, and 7% on the how. It's just a natural thing that we do. I call it, over and opposed to storytelling, I call it data telling. You and I, to the person, are natural-born data tellers. We just do it naturally. We think that the most important thing we have to offer is the what. And so that's what we start with, that's what we finish with, that's what we're blinded by. This whole process we're talking about is my way of trying to help us break out of that tendency. So how do we break out of that tendency? We break out of that tendency by focusing on the people that we are trying to serve. In particular, the way I like to think about it and the way I thought about it in this case study is, how do I make this person the hero? Because if we're not careful, if we're not aware of this, who ends up being the hero? The data, the content, or even us become the hero of everything that we create instead of our audience becoming the hero of what we create. One of my favorite authors is John Steinbeck, and I'll never forget walking over to our bookshelf in the living room, and I opened this book up, East of Eden. Some of you are probably familiar with it. And I opened up to the preface where he describes the Salinas Valley in California. And I was just standing there, and I remember it was a sunny day, and the light was kind of coming into our living room, and I was like, gosh, I've never read this. My wife got it for a book group, and I've never read Steinbeck, and I started thumbing through it. I looked up an hour later, felt like 2 minutes later, and I had just been standing there in our living room, and I read the entire, first chapter, and was completely enthralled. I was in another place. That's what good stories do. They enthrall us. They draw us in. They don't let us go. And that should be our goal for everything we create. As Steinbeck says here, if a story is not about the hearer, they will not listen. And here I make a rule: a great and interesting story is about everyone, or it will not last. Everything you create, everything I create, needs to be about the people that we are serving. They need to be the hero. So now you know your audience's story. Now you know their brand story. Now you know your message. Now you know your medium. And most importantly, now you know yourself a bit better. You can go through this process as many times as you need. And as you put these all together, you will build what I call resonance. And there are 3 steps to resonance, and this is literally a neurological phenomenon. If any of you have not read Mind Sight by Daniel Siegel, it's a fabulous book that goes into the neurology of resonance. 3 things happen when you and I resonate. The first is you get your story. The second is you get your audience's story, and then you let them know that you get them. This is true of your best friend as it is of the people that you work with. And what happens is when they get that you get them, they get gotten. It's bad English, but it works. They get gotten. And our entire goal, we could sum up in these 2 words, that they would get gotten. So, with that, let's go back. You and I think we share these things in common. We're frustrated, we're determined, we want excellence. And so where do you go from here? There are a couple different ways that I've seen people go. How do I make this work as quickly as possible? What I would love is for you not to choose this path. This is just hope for the best, is to kind of say, great, Andrew, I'm going to run and kind of fold this in. This has to become something that we take seriously. It has to be something that we actually change the way that we do things and take the time it takes to build this out, because it's powerful. Otherwise, it becomes incredibly confusing and inefficient and frustrating. What I hope I've done today is I've built out a map. It's simple, it's strategic, it's phenomenally rewarding. I will never forget at the close of the project, the case study that I've shared with you, this person coming up, I think she shook my hand literally 10 times. I don't think I've ever had anyone do that before. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. This is so helpful. That's what it's about, right? Is giving people something they can take back and will actually change the way they do things.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
So one of our participants is asking, what were those 3 get 'em things again?
Oh, yeah. Let me go back to that. Get your story, get your audience's story, and then let them know that you get them. Think about everyone right now, you can do this. Think about the best listener that you know. So, the best listener that you know. The reason that they create resonance with you is that they get you, right? They let you know that they get you. And then the third thing happens. You get that they get you. But you have to have all 3. And so essentially what I'm doing is encouraging you to be that person for the audiences that you're serving, is to get them, to let them know that you get them in such a way that they get that you get them. And then they get gotten. So hopefully that's helpful. That answers that. Okay, so I want to make sure we leave time here for some questions. But before we do that, I promised that I would give you a bonus resource here to take away. And the whole purpose of the Hero's Journal is to ground you in who you are as a messenger. What do you bring to this? How do you translate this into your own work? So make sure to click that link and download the Hero's Journal. And I would also encourage you, again, we've done this for not even an hour. If you're interested in my 4-week online class where we go through this in way more detail and you get one-on-one coaching and the whole process in addition to a whole bunch of other resources, I would encourage you to register for the summit. And that link is also available as well. And you can click on that. And if you have any questions at any time, email me at andrew@afrobinson.com. But let's open up for questions. And before we get there, I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this, and for DJ and ATD and everyone who helped make this possible. Working with Brand Live has been phenomenal, so really appreciate it. So any questions? I also have some FAQs that we can go through as well.
Terrific. We do have a couple questions.
Great.
And there's time for people to type in a few more questions. The first question is about Rain Man gifts that you mentioned. And so how can we celebrate those gifts some more? Or how do you have an example of somebody who did a particularly good job of using a Rain Man gift to bring their message across?
Yeah. Well, the question, a good question is, how do we actually clarify what our Rain Man gifts are? And a few things, I encourage people to do a few things. It's one thing for you and I to, the first thing I would do is write down those stories that you can come up with where, you know, that experience where you're in the room with people and you're like, this seems pretty obvious, but I guess I'll say it. And then you say something and people are like, whoa, that's amazing. We never thought about that. That's, you know, it helped solve a problem. It helped change the course of something. Inventory, take an audit of all of those stories. I remember, gosh, years ago, golfing with a friend who had a little photography company, and we're walking along, and he's telling me about some struggles that he's having. I mean, you know, everyone's a photographer these days, so how do you build a successful photography business? And I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, I don't know. I kind of outlined a thing for him. I didn't even know I was doing it. It ended up basically being an entire business plan that helped take his whole company to another level. I wasn't even thinking about it. That's just, we are all gifted in very unique ways. It's a matter of then harnessing that, trusting that if I offer this, it's going to give the greatest value to the people that I serve. So the second thing I would recommend, in addition to taking an audit of your own Rain Man stories, is actually asking friends, because they're going to, you know, my friends, they know all my weirdness. They know, like, oh, you know, for good or for bad, but there's like, you know, you've got, how, you know, ask them. Say, like, what do you notice? I mean, it feels weird, right? But ask them, what am I, like, particularly good at? Maybe go back to people you've worked with on a project and go, hey, do you have like 10 minutes, or you want to grab coffee real quick? I just want to, this is a little weird, but I'm really interested, like, to get some feedback on what do I do that's uniquely good? Now, out of that, you start clarifying, like, this seems like unusually, this seems like where I am better at things than other people. And the biggest thing, that's one thing. The hard thing is to trust yourself to then go, I'm going to commit to this. I'm committing to this. And that may mean giving up projects that aren't really accessing your gifts as well, and being true to, no, I'm not offering as much value to people here, so I want to offer people value here, and it's going to be fantastic for them and for me. So,
terrific. And our second question, simple one. Do you have a reference for that Stanford study about the how and the what?
I don't have it at my fingertips, but yeah, I can dig that. I can provide the
Follow
link
up
for
with
that.
that?
Yeah.
Terrific. And that wraps up our questions.
Okay, great. Let's see. Some of the other questions I often get is, like, where can you go wrong in this process, and how can this break down? The biggest thing I would challenge you to do is don't be satisfied. Whenever I go into a project, I try to sustain a high level of dissatisfaction. And actually, there was a study done on a number of they did athletes and CEOs and people who had been very successful entrepreneurs, and they found something very interesting. One is that you would think that these people have a higher level of satisfaction because they've achieved so much, right? It's the opposite. They're actually incredibly dissatisfied people. Doesn't mean they're not happy, but they're dissatisfied because they know they can do better, right? I mean, that's what we've been talking about, is we know we can do better. And so I would challenge you to take each of these steps that I've gone through and don't be satisfied. Push them till the end, which is the whole reason for Summit. That's where we get in and we dig in and we say, I'm going to push this story to the very, very end until we get, all of a sudden, it's like, that's it. Everything becomes so clear. So that's one of the things that I would challenge you to do is just have a healthy dose of dissatisfaction. So with that, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time, and because I know you all have a lot to do. But like I said, my goal today was to show up to make this time well worth your time, and I trust I've done that. I hope so. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to write me at andrew@afrobinson.com. And if you're interested in going deeper with this, click on that link for Summit. I'd love to connect with you and have you be part of that class as we ramp up. All right? Thanks, everyone. Take care.